the Yellowstone fossil forests, for instance. He started his video with an attack on the creationist view of a younger Earth, and he was using the argument from dendrochronology, which is tree ring studies. There are bristlecone pines in the U.S. that are supposedly lived for many thousands of years, but more so than that, they supposedly then match those up with rings in logs, and supposedly had a very strong argument against a creationist worldview that in fact the Earth is much longer than what we were claiming, and he was claiming this was very strong evidence. So can we start? So think of some, and they can be hard questions, because I know there's people out there throwing a lot of stuff at those of us that have a particular worldview, and I want to know, we can't answer all the questions, but they're all alternatives. Tell us about that.
Let me just start out by saying, when you look at people attacking the, I probably need to turn this on. All right, can you hear me now? Yeah. When you hear people attacking belief in the biblical record of history, what you generally see them going after are what they see as the more easily attacked points. And obviously, when it comes to history, we cannot travel back in time. People talk about time's arrow. It's the one dimension that goes in only one direction for us. So when we are reconstructing the past, that's what we're doing. We just can't really know. So let me give you a very practical or simple example of that. How many of you believe that there are pyramids in Egypt? Okay, yeah. Yeah, some of you have seen them. How many of you haven't seen the pyramids in Egypt but believe that they're there? Yeah, me too. I'd love to go and see those Egyptian pyramids, but it just hasn't happened. So, I believe that they are there. That is something that someday, I can get on an aeroplane, I can get on a boat, I can go to Egypt and see those things. I can take in information through my empirical senses. How many of you know how those pyramids were built? Yeah, come on, you've seen the pyramids. Surely you're from Egypt. Didn't I hear you say that? Yes. And you don't know how they built the pyramids.
Actually, a lot of people know. I actually know.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You might have heard theories. You might have heard theories about how those pyramids were built. How could we know how they built the pyramids back then? What if I did, let me ask you this. Let's say I think I've figured out how they did that, and I actually go and I build a pyramid using the technique that I believe they used. Does that prove that pyramid, that they built their pyramids in that way? No, see, it doesn't. What I would have demonstrated is a way in which pyramids can be built, but I haven't shown the way that the pyramids, those specific pyramids, were built. How could I know how? What would be something that would give me confidence that I know how the pyramids were built? Yeah, I mean, but I can't travel back in time. So assuming I can't travel back in time, how would I know? How would that be theoretically possible?
Let's say there's together with the pyramids, you would find a piece of clay with writing about the way it was built.
Exactly. A written record. So let's say that. Somebody goes into a pyramid and they find a piece of papyrus there, and it says, I am so-and-so, I'm the engineer who built this pyramid, and this is how we did it. Would I believe that written record? Yeah, of course I would. That written records by people who experienced the events are the gold standard for understanding history. I'll give you another example. How many of you believe that Julius Caesar visited England in about, what was it, about 60 BC or 40 BC? I can't remember what it was, but not long before the time of Christ. Okay? I sincerely believe he did. Okay? Is that because I've been able to, find somewhere, on some rock in England that somebody chiseled in there, I, Julius Caesar, was here, 66 BC? Of course not. That doesn't exist. There is zero physical evidence that Julius Caesar ever trod on British soil. What we do have is what Julius Caesar himself wrote. He wrote, I went to England. I went over there, he had a few skirmishes with the local people and eventually decided to come back. He gave his personal first-hand account. Now, the most recent the most ancient examples of the writings of Julius Caesar are relatively recent. I can't remember how old they are, but they're not that old, certainly less than 1,000 years old. Okay. But I believe that they are giving a reasonably accurate record of things. It doesn't seem implausible that a man who was there conquering Gaul would maybe decide to nip across the English Channel to see what was going on over there. Written records of history are the gold standard. The Bible is a written record of history. These guys were there. I wasn't, and I can't be. So just on a basic sort of fundamental level, of course I'm going to believe the historical record in the Bible, unless there's some really compelling reason not to. So in this particular case, here is what is being presented as a reason not to believe what's recorded in Scripture. And what are they doing? They're looking at tree rings, and they're saying, okay, every year a tree adds a new ring, and as a consequence of that, I should be able to look at tree rings on things like bristlecone pines, and I should be able to count back the number of years, and therefore that is, my counting up of those rings in the bristlecone pine will give me a more accurate record of history, because the pine tree never lies, but who knows about the Bible, okay? Let me ask you this. Do you think that pine trees really do lay down one ring every year? It seems like most of the time that's what pine trees do. Most of the time, right. However, there are plenty of reasons why there may be exceptions to these sorts of things. Strange weather events, for example. Okay? Also, there is this claim that they can match up the patterns of tree rings. So that, what that tells you is if trees grew at the same time, they should have experienced the same weather conditions, so you should be able to sort of match up tree ring patterns in a tree that maybe lived a little bit longer than another one with another one, and then sort of use that as a method of concatenating things to get back further in time. So I've actually been up to look at the bristlecone pines that are growing there in California. It's a very interesting place to visit. And you know what? Yeah, they have some very nice sections of that wood And you can see there are an awful lot of tree rings in there. However, what you do not see is necessarily a nice continuous sequence that goes back, beyond a couple, 3,000 years. Once you start getting beyond that, they're putting together bits of stuff. It's not like anybody took a single, what they'll do is they'll take a core from the wood, and so they just have a section of it. It's not like they go and cut these things off and then count the tree rings. Nobody's doing that. So they take a core, and then they start counting these things up. Now, I believe that these guys, they're not trying to be dishonest or anything like that. They're doing their best, okay? But they are applying certain assumptions to what they're doing that probably are not true. One of them being this rule that there's only one tree ring produced every year. In fact, I believe that it has been demonstrated that occasionally trees will produce more than one tree ring a year. Think about a situation where you have, or not necessarily produce a tree ring. Is everybody here familiar with the eruption of Krakatoa in Indonesia? This is the largest volcanic eruption on record. And what that did was it put so much ash into the atmosphere that the whole of the northern hemisphere was cooled down. And certainly in North America, they didn't experience a summer that year. They had snow in July in places. So that would be an example of a year where there would be no tree ring laid down, quite possibly. But at other times, you can have situations where, let's say you have a very warm spring and then a strange weather event that interrupts like a late frost or something like that, that then resets the tree, and then it lays down another tree ring if they have, let's say, a warm fall. These sorts of things happen. And figuring out exactly what's going on by counting up tree rings, you can make some good inferences and things, but do I think that counting back that many, thousands of years, that there are not going to be anomalies along the way? No, I don't. Now, I should add to this that I do know a little bit more about this on the basis of discussions with a guy I knew reasonably well, who was in charge of the carbon-14 lab at UC Irvine.
By the way, just to interject, this guy also discredited things by saying, well, carbon-14 shows that this was obviously much older.
Yeah.
That was one of his arguments in this video.
It's an odd one to be making, yeah. What they were claiming to do there was to take tree rings like these bristlecone pine ones and somehow they'll line them up with some trees, trunks that have been preserved in mud or something in Germany and a few other things. And by lining everything up, he claimed that they could get back about 14,000 years. And that was how they then produced their, what's called their standard curve for the carbon-14 thing. That's a whole other big sort of ball of stuff. But, like I said, I think these guys are doing their best, but I don't find these kinds of things to be overly compelling against a written record of history that has proven over and over and over again to be accurate in remarkable detail. Why would I abandon the history that so much archaeology, for example, is consistent with for an inference that somehow or other every one of these tree rings represents a year, and I'm actually able to count back thousands of years. That just seems, when you're looking at things, you always have to make judgments about which of these is more compelling and which is less compelling. For somebody who rejects the Bible before they even start, well, tree rings, that'll do the job very nicely. But for somebody who says, you know what, there was somebody named Eliakim in the Bible, and look at this, we've found a seal from somebody living in Jerusalem at that time named Eliakim. Well, wow, that's pretty compelling, in my opinion. You just have to make a call on it.
Maybe we could we don't have lots of time,
Yeah.
so I just wanted to make sure if there was anything somebody had on their heart that they want to get a question. If not, we can keep going. I just wanted to have the opportunity.
Let me just wrap this up by saying, you know what? You can come up with all kinds of arguments based on inferences and extrapolations and all sorts of things. With the Bible, you don't have to do that. It is an actual record by people who actually lived at that time. And I know there are people who argue against that, but their arguments have proven over and over again to be extraordinarily weak. So, can I tell you precisely which of those rings shouldn't be there? Of course not. But I can tell you that the assumptions that go into those kinds of things like dendrochronology are very uncomfortable. Let's put it this way, a lot less reliable than an actual written record by people who experienced it.
So you say that you feel the evidence in terms of what the Bible records in history is far stronger than the uniformitarianism sort of feeling that everything just obviously happens. Well,
uniformitarianism has been shown to be a bad assumption over and over and over and over again.
So that it wasn't necessarily always experiencing what we might see today.
Yeah.
So it's
stuff changes, climate change, stuff like that. So we wouldn't expect everything to be the same. Occasionally there are catastrophes and big things happen. That's what we observe, and as a consequence of that, that's what, in my opinion, we should expect to be occurring in the past. Everybody invokes big things in the past to try to explain the data that they observe, for example, in the fossil record. So even though there's this claim of buying into uniformitarianism, in real life, people only are dogmatic about uniformitarian assumptions when they make their argument against the other side stronger.
Okay, more assumptions.
Yeah. And by the way, carbon-14, I bet that your guy doesn't talk about the carbon-14 that's found in coal that's supposed to be over 200 million years old.
When there shouldn't be any carbon-14
Well,
around.
no.
Right.
Carbon-14 should be completely gone within about 100,000 years.
He just made a passing comment to say, well, and carbon-14 shows, this is older. And
Yeah.
very dogmatic about it.
Exactly. Everybody believes radiometric dates when they agree with what they already think is true. And everybody throws them out when they are clearly wrong because of what they believe otherwise. All the time. That's a routine thing that's done. It's done with carbon-14 dating. It's also done with rubidium, strontium, and uranium, lead, and all of these other methods. And contamination is invoked.
Like the lava in the
Well,
New
in
Zealand volcanoes
yeah,
that were
exactly.
2.4 million years in 1954, the lava flow
Exactly.
or whatever. We had that in our class.
when people watch the lava come out of the volcano and then they measure the, they use radiometric dating methods on it, and lo and behold, you're getting dates of hundreds of thousands to millions of years,
There's a problem.
then, you know, nobody believes it. Nobody does. You know, so there is picking and choosing with this sort of thing that goes on.
Has anybody else had or have friends that perhaps have left the
here we go.
church over some of these issues?
Okay. Oh,
You have a question?
yeah.
Go ahead and ask.
Oh, okay. So the Bible like mentions like giants, I believe, called the Nephilim.
Nephilim, yes.
So does science have any discovery on, I don't know, their existence or like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And sons of men, yes. The Nephilim are kind of an interesting thing, and it's really something that's probably better talked about with a theologian. I will tell you that, to the best of my knowledge, from a scientific perspective, people, you know, significantly larger than those living today, I'm not aware of any that have been found. People have made these claims quite commonly over the years, but nothing's really panned out. Yeah. Scientifically, you know, I mean, that doesn't mean that there weren't giants. It just means we haven't found compelling evidence of their remains.
I was just going to say that we lived in Indonesia before, and I know some people who found a femur bone that was over 2 meters long from a human, like in a cave there. So
What did they do with it? Do you know?
they left it there, I think.
Yeah. See, this is what I hear all the time. You know, the people come to it. They've always, and it's not that I think that people are necessarily doubting or making stuff up, but you know, from a scientific perspective, if you found a human femur that's 2 meters long, bring it out so the world can see it. You know, if you happen to find one here in Lebanon, let me know. We'll be famous together. All right. I've had people come to me and talk about how you know, we should be going to Fiji, for example. They claim that, you know, we should be going and digging up people's bones in Fiji because there's definitely giants there. I had another person claiming that we should go to Siberia, which doesn't really narrow things down very much, and because that's where they are. And these, you know, what can I say? Yes, it would be very interesting if somebody showed up with a 2-meter femur, because I mean, I just have so many questions about it from a scientific. What's that?
On carry-on luggage, they won't accept that.
No, yes. What would it look like going through the X-ray machine? Yeah. Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of studying on like the biblical age of history, just aligning genealogies and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was doing some internet research, and I came across a guy called Bishop Usher, and he did all the alignments of the genealogies and Abraham and, you know, the kingdoms and stuff. And he came up with the Earth's age to be, you know, 6,004 years back,
Well,
I think.
he had the creation 4004 BC.
Yeah, and then he said it like October 22, I think, is what I read, anyway, on this internet site. And so I'm wondering, is that why Creation Week is in October, is because of Usher's findings at all? Does it have anything to do with it?
You know, it would be cool if that was the case.
yeah.
However, that's not the case. To be perfectly honest, I have no idea why it wound up on this date. This is what happened. If you're interested in the history, the Ministerial Association came up with this creation Sabbath idea. It was a brilliant plan, you know, and they took it to the you know, GC Executive Committee, and they're like, yes, let's do it October 22. Well, the fourth week in October. And Nobody has ever been able to explain how exactly they arrived at that date. However, it's kind of a nice date because it's in the fall and, you know.
Well,
That's if you're in the northern hemisphere,
Yeah.
right?
not that I
Or the spring.
believe that it's in October 22
Yeah.
or whatever, but because most of the sources I looked at had no idea when it was, and they were just estimating, 6,000 years back, 6,500, whatever, just estimating like this, But this guy actually produced the real date, which is, I don't know, pretty.
Yeah. Let me just comment on it just a little bit. Yeah. Those of you who are scientists, you understand error in calculations. So I'm 56 years old. By telling you that, the error is at least 2 years. Okay? I could be 56, 364 days old, and I'd still be 56, right? But if I was living where I was growing up, they start counting from 1. So when you're born, that's your first year. And then your second year and your third year and so on.
Is this Thailand, is it?
This was in Malaysia.
Malaysia.
But I think some Thais do it the same way. So there's basically 2 years worth of error just by telling you my age, okay? A minimum of 2 years. So when you start adding things like ages together, with every single one of those, you've got to allow a year or two of error in there, and that's cumulative. So there's no way you can say it was exactly this day. What you can say is, yeah, it looks like it was about 4000 BC. But the numbers that are there, if you're handling them in a scientific way, and by the way, I don't mean to criticize Bishop Ussher. I think he did a great job. Okay? I just don't think that those numbers actually allow you to get that kind of precision. And then, there are other people who bring up things like, well, look, the time spans that are given in the Septuagint version of the Bible are a little bit different and whatever. I will tell you what my personal belief is, and that is, yeah, we're talking about thousands of years, and I'm perfectly comfortable with 6,000 or 7,000 years. But I'm happy to leave it with a bit of wiggle room. We get ourselves into unnecessary trouble if we give more precision than the data allow us to give.
And that's what these people attack us on, I
Exactly.
think, is sloppy science.
Yeah.
And they have a field day with attacking people that are not careful with their data.
If you're ever going to make a claim, okay, it's always smart to make it a modest claim, because a modest claim is one that is very hard to attack. Okay? If you make an extravagant claim, like October 22, 4004 BC, I'm sorry, that's way too easy to shoot down. It's clearly just not possible, in my opinion. And so you actually hurt the argument that you're making by
And
doing
there is a lot of that out there.
There is,
unfortunately.
there's stuff all over the internet that's absolutely barking mad, and it nearly drives me mad. Every church I go to, there's somebody who's there with, oh man, I remember, have you guys ever heard of Inca stones? Yeah, these stones are from Peru that have stuff in them that looks like dinosaurs. Well, they're obvious frauds. Okay, my colleague has actually gone and found the people who make these things. But you can imagine how embarrassing and actually disturbing it was for me to be at a church. I spoke at this church, and literally as I'm walking out, there's this guy standing with this Inca stone with a dinosaur on it. What am I supposed to say to him? Okay? sorry, you're a sucker and you just bought a forgery. I didn't. And then imagine how disturbed I was the next morning to be getting on the plane and discover that he was the pilot. And he was that big of a sucker. I mean, what other bizarre things was he believing in? So, you know, we don't need stuff like that. We don't need fakery. Where we can make solid claims, let's make those solid claims. Where we don't know, let's say we don't know. Where there is no evidence, let's be honest about that as well. The record of history that's given in the Bible is robust. It doesn't need giants' bones. It doesn't. I know that there are some people who claim that the Nephilim weren't necessarily even giants. I don't know. That's why I'm saying talk with a theologian or somebody who's really an expert on the language. But I've heard about 50 different theories on it myself. So, you know, if there were giants, that's great. Bear in mind that giant is a relative term as well. Okay? And we want to be pretty careful about that. I kind of felt a bit like a giant growing up because all of my friends came up to about here. That's just because of, I don't know, those Germanic genes and growing up in Asia. But then I remember going to Holland and feeling quite average. I remember getting on a tram once in Amsterdam, and this policeman was next to me, and he was like this. He must have been 7 feet tall. His gun was here. Yeah, it was amazing. That's a giant. Anyway.
Anything else?
Other comments? Yeah.
Okay, back here.
Then how do scientists measure the time or how old is the Earth? Why I'm saying this, I was reading an article the other day, and I think the author got a very interesting point, because it says, in the beginning God created heavens and earth, and the earth was formless. So when was that?
Yeah.
Because we understand in the New Testament it tells us, 2000 from this time to this time, and then that's why we come up with 7,000. We say, how old is the earth, roughly speaking? And then we see the dramatic change in Genesis chapter 3 and chapter 6. We see that, the son of Adam just built a city, and he got married to this and this, and all of a sudden just, after he killed his brother. Mm-hmm. So, and then chapter 6, we see a different change. I'm not talking about, the sons of man and the daughters of the earth. No. I'm just talking about, could it be possibly that there is something missing here?
Bear in mind, I'm a scientist, I'm a biologist. So, but let me just sort of address a couple of things that do, I think, touch on what you're saying. I do not read Hebrew. I'm not an expert in these things. So I'm reliant on translations and everything like everybody else. But there are at least 3 theories about what is going on in the opening chapter or 2 of Genesis. One has to do, one idea is when the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that was day one. I mean, that the universe came into existence, and so the entire universe, including the earth, is only, this 6,000 or 7,000 years of time. Then there is a theory that is popular among Adventist theologians that says that, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then there's what's called a passive gap So yeah, that was in the beginning. This is sort of the universal statement that Moses is making. And then, 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, then the Spirit of God starts moving on the face of the waters, and this creation week unfolds. And a lot of physicists are very excited about this idea. And then you've got people who want to go with the day-age theory, in which each of those days of creation is eons long, just long periods of time. Here is the way I look at it as a Christian and as a biologist. I don't care about the passive gap theory because it does absolutely nothing to address the problems that I have to deal with. What I'm concerned about is how old are the fossils? Because the fossils are evidence of living things. And, that's number one, and they are dead. If you start invoking long periods of time where all kinds of stuff is dying before Adam and Eve, you have a huge theological problem. You have death before sin. And how you get a coherent story of salvation, a coherent soteriology with death before sin, has never been explained to me by people who are advocates of this eons of time kind of idea. So I reject that idea. I think it's unbiblical. It doesn't stand up theologically. As far as whether God created the entire universe on the first day of creation, or whether it was created 14 billion years ago and then God just came along thousands of years ago and created life, again, it does nothing for me as far as biology is concerned. Because if you have death before sin, Christianity doesn't work. It's that simple. Read Romans 5. It's just nailed over and over again, this particular point. So, if it makes physicists, I don't think there's any great theological reason not to have that passive gap, but I don't see it as being helpful. Physicists do. Yes.
I have a question. I don't know if you know that much, if you know more about paleontology, but I want to know what you think of if dinosaurs were on the ark.
Yeah. I wish I'd just been on the ark myself, just so that I could answer that definitively for you. Here is what I would say about dinosaurs. Most dinosaurs were not gigantic creatures. Most of them were creatures that fall within the range of what we see living today. So there's no compelling reason that they couldn't have been on the ark. There was more than sufficient room on the ark for dinosaurs. In addition to that, some people have argued the dinosaurs were these vicious animals that, after the flood would have eaten up all the people and it would have been all over or something. No, there are plenty of dinosaurs that were vegetarian and, looked like perfectly nice, peaceful creatures. And then there are those people who say, well, actually, dinosaurs and birds are the same thing, so they were on the ark. So you can take your pick of all of those things. My suspicion is that dinosaurs were on the ark and that they have gone extinct, as many other creatures have since that time, which is kind of sad because I'd certainly like to see a dinosaur. And, and if you accept the idea that birds are dinosaurs, maybe you are seeing them.
dinosaurs in the sea.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Okay, I'm going to reveal my terrible skepticism, okay? My response is to all of these kinds of extravagant claims like that is, show me the dinosaur. Okay? Show me the dinosaur. That's science, okay? Don't show me a blurry picture. Show me a dinosaur. Listen, I know a guy who is obsessed with the idea that pterosaurs are still flying around in New Guinea. Okay? I mean, this guy, he's a fireman. Somehow or other he gets people to fund trips for him to go whacking around in the jungle in New Guinea trying to capture one of these pterosaurs that he's sure is there. And, you know, he keeps sending me emails about all this evidence that pterosaurs are there, except he's produced everything except a pterosaur. And he has every excuse. Well, they only fly at night. And they, you know, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. The Bible doesn't give any definitive information about these things. The science gives us no information about them. So therefore, you know, my feeling is, I don't think there are dinosaurs wandering around, but I'd be mighty excited if someone finds one. Yeah, if you find one here in Lebanon, get some good pictures. If you can get a few tissue samples, that would be good as well. Yeah. If you can capture one and kind of, you know, put it in the tennis courts down there and trust me, you'll be famous. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to keep people too long. We're getting close to 6:56, so if people need to go, that's fine. But if there was any more pressing questions, we've had some good questions. That was some good questions. Does anybody else know of somebody whose faith has been shaken because they have this definitive proof that something they believe thought was right?
Not quite like that, but I need to ask. I was turn it on. That's right. The event that triggered the supposed demise of all the dinosaurs, the asteroid collision or whatever it was, how do we as Christians explain that?
Well, I don't think that, you know, I want to be careful here. Much of the time, I don't think it's necessary for us as Christians to have a different explanation than everybody else. There's this theory that there was an asteroid that hit somewhere around the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and that caused this global cataclysm, and that somehow or other that is what killed off the dinosaurs. You know, I don't see a sort of special Christian angle on that. You could say, well, maybe that was the flood or the timeline or something. I think everyone agrees that if that event actually happened, it was a very rapid event. So I don't think that injects significant amounts of time into the historical record. One of the what I would say about it is, I'm a little bit skeptical as a scientist of this particular scenario. The reason I'm skeptical about it is this. When you look at the fossil record, if you make the Darwinian assumption that we're looking at, you know, basically slices of time as we come up through these layers of rock, then the dinosaurs, when they disappear, it just seems like there should be things like frogs, for example, should disappear too. Frogs are much more environmentally sensitive than reptiles are. You know, they have to have both water that works for them and land that works for them. And yet the amphibians, it has no impact on. The flowering plants, it doesn't seem to have an impact on them. They just go right through this great extinction event, supposedly, at the KT boundary. So, I don't know. I just don't think that we've quite got the right theory on this at this particular point, irrespective of whether there was a meteor impact in the Yucatan. Yeah.
Okay, that brings us on to another question that just came up over here, where they wanted to explain something about, is that on? No, it's not on. Okay.
Is that better? Oh, okay. Well, we wanted some explanation. Okay, the geological column. You look at it, things appear, things disappear. It seems to be a strong evidence for this Darwinian view that it's a historical record. Maybe you could just say something about the geological column from maybe a Christian standpoint. We know kind of what the Darwinists say about it.
Yeah.
We know we don't have all the answers. Is that the question?
Here is what I would say about the geologic column. I think at this
what is the geological column, just so people know?
So the geologic column is all of these layers of rock that we can go out there and look at. So if you look around here in Beirut, I'm sure that there have to be some road cuts and things like that, or some cliffs where you can see layers of rock. On average, on the surface of the Earth, you have something like 10 kilometers of this sedimentary rock all over the place, and it tends to be in distinct layers. So the question is, how did those come about, and what do they tell us about the past? If you look at the fossils that you find in these different layers, you definitely see them sorted out. So there are the Mesozoic layers, for example, and when you look in those, that's where you find dinosaurs. You do not find them in the Cenozoic layers, and you don't find them in the Paleozoic layers. They are not there. It would be exciting if you found them, but they're just not there. So the question is, why do we have this ordering that you see in the fossil record? And the simple answer is, I don't know. And I am confident that nobody else does as well. I've listened to theory after theory after theory about how that ordering in the geological column came about. And while these theories might solve one problem, they don't solve others. So yes, you can make an argument that it built up over many millions of years. You can do that if you pick and choose your arguments right, your data. But unfortunately, science isn't about coming up with theories that only account for some of the data that you have. Science is about coming up with theories that encompass all of the data. And as I said, I've looked at these theories. None of them work. None of the creationist theories work. None of the Darwinist theories work. And I get into trouble for saying that. My paleontologist friends get quite upset with me, but I'm a biologist, so I don't care, and I'm Australian. It is okay not to know. In fact, it is better to know that you don't know something than to think you know something that you don't. And that's Confucius, so it must be smart. Yeah, but Confucius wasn't the only one to make that observation.
So there are some things that are just still mysteries, and we.
Well, yes. I mean, how boring would life be if we had all the answers, especially on that? What you see in the fossil record is the sudden appearance of organisms and the sudden disappearance of organisms. So the KT boundary one with the dinosaurs is a famous one. And we can come up with theories about why things disappear. Coming up with theories about why they appear in the first place is problematic. But let me just give you one example, and we're going to talk about this in the class. There are these fossils called Lazarus species. Why are they called Lazarus species? It's because they go extinct, just as extinct as the dinosaurs in the fossil record, and yet we find them living today. So a famous example of that are coelacanths. Coelacanths are these fish. They're very distinctive. They are not particularly uncommon fossils. You find them all over the place, and then they disappear, I think, supposedly about 80 million years ago, somewhere in that range, plus or minus a few million, doesn't really matter. And yet we find them living today off the coast, off the east coast of Africa, and amazingly enough, off the north coast of Sulawesi. And so, I mean, really, for 80 million years, those things, none of them were fossilized, and yet before that, they were fossilized perfectly well. Probably the best example I know of are things called monoplacophorans. They're supposed to have disappeared 380 million years ago, and they live in the ocean. They produce a shell. They do everything that is supposed to make them very good candidates for being fossilized. Why would I believe that these things weren't fossilized for 380 million years, but that somehow they came into existence when they show up in the fossil record instead of 380 million years before that? You know, there's something going on that sorted things out in the fossil record. That is real. But what that something is not clear. And I think, you know, these Lazarus species, these are not uncommon. There are plenty of examples of them. And they clearly show that the fossil record is not a record of what was living at certain times, because they disappear, and yet they must have been alive. So some other mechanism must have been in play to do this sorting out. I wish I knew what it was, because then I'd be looking really smart right now.
I guess we probably, I don't know how long we're supposed to be here, but we keep getting quiet. If people want to leave, they're welcome to leave, but if we keep at, until
Now
he falls over
let's
from
wrap it
jet
up
lag.
with this question.
Okay, we have back here. Do you have questions?
We found in the Bible incredible method that now used to distinguish female and male. He separated female and male before the rain. Is it possible to distinguish all the animals which is female and male?
Not necessarily, no. You know, some organisms it's pretty easy to tell, but no. Are you talking about in the fossil record? No. Sometimes, but not always. Yeah.
Maybe it's just to, sometimes when we're traveling with the kids and you see, you know, the rocks and the different things, and it's, oh, cool, and this and that, and you know, sometimes they ask, so how do we explain these things from a creationist point of view, the geological column and all these rocks with the different layers and the dinosaurs here or whatever, how do we explain it as creationist?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, because I mean, we don't believe that, but how do we explain it then from our perspective?
Well, here is what I would say is kind of interesting about the biblical record. If the Bible just gave those genealogies and nothing else, you know, it might be kind of a difficult thing. But the Bible gives not just the genealogies that allow us to see that we're talking about thousands of years, not millions of years here. It also tells us about a global catastrophe that involved massive disruption and huge amounts of water. What do we see in all of these in these layers? Massive disruption, and it's just incredible. They're all water deposits. I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions to that. For example, there's the Coconino sandstone that you see in the Grand Canyon. It's just one of the layers, and some people believe that that was laid down in like a desert environment, although there's now compelling evidence that it was actually underwater too. But there is no dispute that the majority of the deposits that we see were waterborne, and that the fossils that we see were rapidly buried. Okay. The Bible provides a possible mechanism for that. Does it explain every layer of rock everywhere? I don't know. I haven't looked at every layer of rock everywhere. But what I do know is that on a global scale, what you see there sure looks to me like it may well be explained in terms of some kind of global catastrophe like that. And I'm not alone. So does everybody else. It's just that I, as a Bible believer, only invoke one global catastrophe, whereas the Darwinists are invoking multiple global catastrophes to sort of kludge their theory together. How many global catastrophes could life survive through? I don't know. But so do you see what I'm saying? I know that the layers at the very, very top were put down during the 1 year of the flood? No, I don't. But I'm pretty sure that a lot of that there represents the flood. And I also know that there's plenty to find out still. That's why, if anybody's interested in becoming a scientist, anyone who's interested in becoming a geologist or paleontologist, go for it. Don't lose your faith. Be careful about that. But go for it, because there are infinite questions, just as there are in any other area of science. There is one question back there. We will call this definitively the last one. Yeah. This is the last one.
Well, this should be a pretty easy one. What are some materials that we can access? I know that southern.edu/origins is a good one. What other materials could we use?
There's actually a lot of great stuff that's out there. There's also a lot of rubbish, so you do need to be discerning. I like to think that there's good stuff on the GRI website. That's just grisda.org. There are a bunch of videos and stuff like that there. Yes, the Southern Origins materials are very nicely done. It depends a lot on what kind of age group and audience you're looking for. I work a lot with a video production company called Illustra Media. They are not Adventists, and because of that, we don't have to pay to produce these films.
We showed half of one of those at Assembly a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
The Living Seas. Excellent.
Living Waters. Yeah, Living Waters.
Yeah.
And so I personally think their stuff is excellent. They have another website that we've sort of been working together on developing called the John 1010 Project. And in that, what we're doing is we're putting up short films that are easily viewed over the internet. So the John 1010 Project is certainly a great place to go to for various materials. We're sort of covering everything from the reliability of Scripture to design in nature, all sorts of stuff along those lines. Well, thank you so much. God bless you. Shall we close with prayer?
Close with prayer.
Let's stand and we'll close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, I thank you that you are our Creator and our Redeemer, and we can know that with absolute certainty. I thank you that there are still mysteries to be found out. And I ask that you will send your Holy Spirit to be with each of us as we think about these things. Give us the wisdom that only you have to provide. Be with us throughout this coming week. and bless all of our activities, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.